were able to take something important from it. I just thought it would be a great way to kick off our meeting. Now I would love to introduce our SHRM leadership team, our fellow students who have helped me and helped this chapter become what it is today. So as you all know, like I said, I'm the chapter president, and I am currently an MBA candidate here at Fogelman. I have a BBA in management with a concentration in HR, and I'm so excited to say that all of our leadership team members are earning their BBAs in management with a concentration in human resources. I would first like to start out by introducing Savannah MacArthur. She is a senior and has recently accepted a HR specialist position with Baptist East Memorial Hospital. So we are so excited for you, Savannah. Next is Annika Johnson. She is our soon-to-be alumni leadership team member, and she is a fleet transportation manager at JB Hunt Transportation Services. Taylor Malone is a senior as well, and she recently accepted an HR internship with Dollar General. So we are excited for her. And last but definitely not least is Samuel Law. He is a senior as well and is currently an HR executive intern for Target. So thank you so much to my leadership team. You guys are fantastic. I would also like
Mary?
Yes.
Can you, your volume is a little bit low. Can you adjust a little bit?
Oh, sure. I'll get closer to the computer. Is that better?
That's better.
Okay, sorry guys. Next, I would like to give a huge shout out and a huge thank you to our advisors. As you know, Dr. Tuberville is our fearless leader, and our chapter would not be what it is today without her. She is also the director of the Professional Development Center here at Fogelman, so we thank her so much for her support. Next is Dr. Lester. She is a HR manager for the Salvation Army Kroc Center, as well as the West Tennessee District Director for the State Council for the Professional SHRM chapter. Tyler Stegall is a Career Pathways Supervisor at the City of Memphis and is the Communications Chair for our local professional chapter. Next is Tiana Pointer. She is a Senior College Relations Specialist with International Paper, as well as a College Relations Chair for the Professional Chapter, or for the Professional SHRM Chapter. And Daniel Tate is a former SHRM Student Chapter President, and he is currently an HR Generalist for University Clinical Health, as well as a College Relations Chair for our Professional SHRM Chapter here in Memphis. So next, I would like to run through a few announcements that our chapter has. Our next interest meeting, our first interest meeting of the semester will be August 20th. So if you guys know anybody out there who's interested in joining our SHRM student chapter, please let them know that that will be on August 20th, and they can register through the CPP website or by emailing me personally. Our internship fair prep meeting is going to be with AutoZone, and we're so excited to announce that will be on August 27th. And I know Dr. T and I are excited for the Internship and Career Week, and that's planned to be September 7th through the 11th. And another one I'm really excited about actually is our Student and Young Professionals Conference that our SHRM Professional Chapter is putting on. And you definitely want to mark your calendars for this. It's on Halloween, but we have a great lineup of speakers and breakout sessions. So please sign up through the SHRM Memphis website. So a couple more before we get started is the virtual HR Connect meeting coming up. You can see on the flyer over to your right that there is a lot of information going to be covered in that meeting. So you definitely want to go ahead and sign up once again through the SHRM Memphis website. And that is July 21st, so that's coming up. You really want to go ahead and register. And we're super excited to announce that the Tennessee SHRM State Conference is here in Memphis this year, and that's going to be November 1st through the 4th. So Dr. T, would you like to talk a minute about the virtual complete professional program?
Absolutely. We have a little bit of time left before school starts. And as you know, our complete professional program, because of COVID, quickly converted to being a virtual complete professional program. And we've had a number of students finish their certificate For our guest, we have a non-credit professional development certificate in 3 different levels, so that once students get the basic certificate, they can move forward. This is great resume content because it's very employer driven, and we have a lot of employers who actually participate in the program. So one of the things you do, and it's now in our eLearn, I want to encourage you to get going with that. You can get your resume done and all ready for the internship and career week before school starts back on August 17th. We will be doing our career fair different this year. We will have it virtually because it was getting a little bit complicated to try to plan around all the daily changes that we're having right now. So you will be registering in order to get to meet these employers. So make sure, and the ticket to get registered is your resume being approved in the Fogelman Internship and Career Network. So get with April Mitchell, get with Allison Goodwin, email professional@memphis.edu, and you will be able to get your resume reviewed and ready to go. We will start having company listings really soon, and so you'll want to be ready. They'll be looking at who is coming. It's a whole week of activity, actually starting on September the 4th with some interview and internship prep activity with employers, and it will run the full week. We're going to have some that are major specific as well as a full fair. So you open those emails and make sure that you are getting prepared for all the different things that are coming for you. You may think, gosh, this is going to be a different season. We won't have all these great career opportunities, but no, no, no. We are going to have them, and you must be there and must be a part of it. You may think, gosh, there's no opportunities. There's no one hiring. But I have one student, Denisa Johnson, who is now in HR in the Learning and Development Coordinator role, and she's actually had 3 promotions since COVID. So there are some companies that are really needing great talent, and you need to be a part of that. So without further ado, I want to introduce my friend, Randy Irving. Randy is a person that I had the chance to meet really via college recruiting initially. And so we got him involved in SHRM Memphis after all the activity that he's had. He may be not saying good things about me because I've put him to work in the diversity and inclusion role, and I tried to get him as the VP, and he is now on our board as Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion. And he is currently with FedEx Supply Chain and Logistics, and he's the director there. But he's going to talk a little bit about what his role at SHRM Memphis is, because the SHRM Professional Chapter is a great resource for you. Like the on July 21st, I would encourage you to be a part of that virtual networking event because it's free, it's safe, and it's a great way to get your name out in front of all of these employers like Randy Irving. So Randy, tell them a little bit about what SHRM Memphis is trying to do with diversity and inclusion efforts. You're muted.
Well, first, thank you for telling me to unmute myself so everybody can hear me. But thank you for that warm introduction. And I really want to thank you for bringing me into the fold with SHRM Memphis. Kathy, she's exactly correct. Our paths crossed initially when I was managing diversity and inclusion with FedEx, and we were coming and highlighting our intern program with the students such as yourself for SHRM. I think I did my last session in that capacity probably in the fall last year, getting ready for our intern program, which unfortunately was put on hiatus right now due to COVID. But right now, my focus is as the VP of Diversity and Inclusion for SHRM. We really want to be the premier resource for diversity and inclusion strategy, implementation, education for all of the businesses in the greater Memphis area. So right now, with so much heightened sensitivity, awareness, racial tensions going on after the murder of George Floyd and Aubrey Ahmaud, we really felt like we would be complicit if we were quiet in this time. So earlier today, probably about 45 minutes before this call started, we had a critical conversation where we talked about the impacts of COVID to the minority population, and we talked about the impact and trauma of systemic racism towards Black Americans. And we had a really healthy, robust conversation, and also outlined some really good, actionable means to move forward towards having a better community here in the United States. So right now, in my role, we're trying to figure out how we give better resources and how we provide better resources for not just human resource professionals, but anybody who has a business where they're leading people or interacting with people or lean on people for their services or products. So we really want to be looked at as premier resource for people to be able to come and get strategies around getting the most from their workforce. I really would, like Kathy said, I would really encourage you to come to the Connect so you can meet people that are already in the HR profession to kind of, one, help you decide what path you want to take as you go into your careers in HR. And also so you'll have people that are looking for you when you start applying for jobs, and you have people that can advocate for you on the front end, and also people that can help you navigate so you don't come across some of the pitfalls and snares like some of the older people such as myself have come across in our time. Very proud that right now we're actually going to kick off the state SHRM conference with our D&I conference, which will be November the 1st, that Sunday. So we've been responsible for putting together that piece, and it's going really well. We think we have a really good, impactful day of programming lined up that will help people to frame out their diversity and inclusion programs, efforts, and initiatives. So very excited about that. And I'm very excited about being here and a part of this panel with you today. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Irving.
All right, we're going to start our program, and I'm going to let Mary talk about our esteemed panel. And all of these folks, I think, have a unique story to share and unique perspective. So students, I think we now have about 26 or 27 students listening. Here's what I'd like you to do. If you have a question, put it in the chat and ask questions. That's what the dialogue is all about. And let's make sure we're asking good questions. This is a safe zone. All I would suggest to you is stay on mute until it's time. And I think it's also helpful if you can share your camera when you have a question, because they want to get to know you too. And it's really helpful to be able to see a face when they hear a question. So Mary, would you introduce our panel?
I'd be happy to. So I've already mentioned Daniel Tate. He was a former SHRM student chapter president, and he has been promoted to HR business partner from HR generalist with University Clinical Health. So congratulations on that, Daniel. James Williams is a former NFL football player and the founder of Fight For Me Incorporated, which is a wonderful nonprofit, and as well as the founder of Pro Process Academy. Thank you for being here today, Mr. Williams. Kathy Clark has worked for FedEx for 30 years. She was, like I said, with them for 30 years and is now retired, but she is a trustee at Springdale Baptist Church. So thank you for being here today, Ms. Clark. Dr. Ruggs is a assistant professor of management at the University of Memphis. She is also the director for the Center of Workplace Diversity and Inclusion. So we're so excited she could be here with us today. And Dr. Tuberville has introduced Mr. Irving, but we really appreciate him being here, and we really can't wait to hear what you guys have to say to these questions. So once again, thank you for participating. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with the first question. And the first question I have for you guys is, when and how should we have a conversation about race and social justice reform? When is it appropriate?
So what or are we going in any order, or can we just jump in?
You guys
Just
can
jump
just
in.
jump in.
Well, I would like to say that I think that we should have these conversations more often than not. And that way, when we have a event, it comes across as being more authentic. You know, when we only have the conversation when there's a critical event going on, then that kind of takes away the authenticity of it. So I think that we should have these conversations often. but we definitely should have them after we have these traumatic events that happen, so that, you know, we can learn from those events, so we can help people deal with the trauma that they see, and then build that path or build that bridge forward from there.
I couldn't agree more.
Anybody else want to jump in?
Well, yeah, I agree with that. And I think we should have these conversations with, at times with, in groups with our friends and different people from different races, so we could have a clear understanding of what actually is going on. I think we avoid these things and get around groups of people and we have fun, but we're still in awe of what has happened, but we never talk about it. So I think it's always an open forum to have it in your social time with some people that come from different walks of life, and we should do that more.
And when I look at the question, it says, when and how should we have a conversation about race and social justice reform? And I guess those are kind of two separate things, but I think the how should happen in several different ways. So if you're looking at, from a school standpoint, having something on a bigger scale, I think then definitely you should have somebody that has the competency to be able to lead that conversation in a constructive and meaningful manner. I also do think, to Mr. Williams' point, we've got to have these conversations in smaller personal forums too. And when we're having those conversations, we've got to be authentic, and we've got to be able to meet each other in the middle. And by that, what I mean is, for a white colleague of mine who may not understand what I go through as a Black man in America, you got to be understanding and accepting of the history of America. And that can be very difficult for a white person to understand some of the atrocities that have happened to Black people, from slavery to Jim Crow to the civil rights movement to now. It's hard to hear, but you've got to be willing to be uncomfortable to hear and accept that. Then me as a Black person having this dialogue with somebody that's white, I've got to be understanding and let them process what they don't know, and not press them and be mad because they don't understand it the same way that I understand it because I'm living it. So we've got to have that middle ground to where we both can really be safe and learn and feel safe in having that conversation. And one of the things that drove me to there is having that conversation with an openly gay friend of mine, because I don't understand, or did not understand, what, you know, being gay in America was like, and I wanted to better understand that. And then when I was having this conversation with a friend of mine, it just brought to light, you know, how I may have approached this same type conversation with somebody that's white that didn't understand what being Black was like, and not understanding and being open to the fact that they don't know because they haven't walked it. So we've got to be able to have that safe place where we don't come down and judge each other because we don't know and understand each other's walks.
I agree. I think the conversation when and how also needs to start in the home. Is you've probably heard after these recent events, many Black men and women have been talking about how they have to educate their children so that they know how to behave when they are confronted with, you know, the police or a difficult situation. So we need to expand on that, and I agree with all that's been said. But you do need to be very careful when you have these type of conversations, because everyone is not open to the subject, and you don't want it to become a controversial type of thing. You want it to be an educational type of conversation. But first, I think it has to take place in homes, all homes. And the children will learn to be more accepting if they grow up with these type of conversations and with this knowledge. And maybe we won't have so much of the controversy that occurs as they grow older.
Great point.
And I want to throw one more thing in because of what you just said. Understanding that your opinion is yours, and they are entitled, whoever you're talking to their opinion, because we're going to have different opinions based on how we were raised, based on what we have went through in life. And I can use, for example, Dr. Tuberville and I have had very difficult conversations about this, going over certain topics and subjects and how I grew up, how she grew up, because people will form an opinion of you because of where you are in life and don't understand where you've come from to even get here and what you've been through. And you can also sometimes do the same. So understanding your audience and who you're talking to when you're having these conversations, and can you have, like you said, a dialogue with them without it being controversial is very important.
Dr. Rhodes,
Yes.
your perspective.
Yes, I think that this is a great conversation. I agree with most of what's been said already. So I won't repeat much of that. I will say that it's really important to not wait to have these conversations. So oftentimes the only time we're having these conversations is when we're seeing these critical points, like the killing of George Floyd that we've seen recently. But talking about race and social justice reform is something that we can do all of the time. So racism in America has been around for over 400 years. So thinking about how we can build this into our conversations. As students, we can think about how do we have these conversations in an educational space and in an educational way. So thinking about not only bringing it into your social spaces and into the home, but into our student organizations. So not just SHRM, but if we're having events in our student organizations, how do we plan events around race and social justice? And thinking about building that in more. And also, how do we bring it into the classroom in our class situations? So when we're talking about things, whether it's HR and selections, thinking about if your professors aren't bringing it up, they should be talking about race and diversity and inclusion. But thinking about, okay, how do the theories that we're learning about, how do the principles that we're talking about affect all employees and all workers? And this is an entry point to talking about some of these issues that we're talking about right now. Because when we're talking about race and social justice, we're not just talking about police reform and police brutality. As students who are going into HR, you're also going into organizations, and we know that there's lots of inequality in employment as well. So how can we start the conversation so that we're better equipped to handle situations when we're in the workplace?
Absolutely.
On the panel, I believe you might be one of our young professionals or an emerging leader.
Are you talking about me?
No, I was really talking about Daniel.
Could you say
But
that
you
again?
were there too. I think you're on age, Enrica.
I'm sorry, what was your question, Dr. Tuberville?
I was just saying, what's your perspective? You are beginning your career.
Mm-hmm.
Most of our panelists have been in their career for a bit. And so what's your thought on this? We have other questions too, but we've already had questions from the audience that are good.
Yeah, I definitely agree with each individual, and making sure, I do think these conversations are very, very critical, and especially for me as an African American man, to understand not only my point of view, but to understand, or I would say accept that other individuals might not understand what we go through. And so we have to definitely make sure that if no one else create these conversations, that at least we try to create these conversations so that everyone could be open and pretty much create or have an understanding of what we go through with racism. And even in the workplace, it's unfortunate, I would say, that anyone would have to really be discriminated against, regardless if it's race, religion, or whatever the case may be. And even in the workforce, you see racism, or and you see these different things that goes on. But I think a conversation is a start of doing something and making sure that at least everyone at least have an understanding of racism.
Daniel, I really agree with what you said, and I really think all the points that were made from this question are going to benefit our members and our students be more equipped in the classroom this fall to have these discussions and continue having these discussions. So I appreciate all the points you all have made. With that, I'm going to move on to the next question. All right, so question number 2. Is there something specific that positively advances a conversation on race and social justice reform? And I'm opening it up to anybody to take that.
I would say, you says there's something specific that positively advances. Yes. It's always positively advanced when you have people in a forum, just like we are doing, and have other people listening, and you can actually get something tangible that you can hold on to that creates change. As far as getting an understanding of, if you don't understand what injustice is, you can't see justice. That's one. Understanding that classism plays a big part in racism. And when you can put those things together and put your hands around them, then you have a better understanding of the human quality of what people go through. When you look at white people in poverty, Black people in poverty, what's actually the difference between somebody who we call in the projects and somebody who they call trailer park trash? That's white. Nothing. But we will separate those and look at it as totally different, but it's still poverty. Well, we put names on it, and then that creates classes, and that it feeds racism in a different way. And so we have to have a grip on this and understanding, and people who are willing to have the conversation and be willing to adapt and change. And last point, I cannot be upset with anyone that was born into luxury or entitlement and has things that may not have understanding. And also, you cannot be mad at somebody who was born and does not have any exposure or is limited in their resources to be able to get to certain things to understand. So we have to educate both parties, no matter where they're coming from.
I'd like to make a couple of points on this. And we always quote Dr. King, but he said so many profound, insightful things. One of the quotes of his that I liked is, I can't be all that I ought to be unless you're able to be all that you ought to be. And you can't be all that you ought to be unless I'm able to be all that I ought to be. And by that, he meant if there is anything that systemically holds one person or group of people out, it impacts everybody. And at some point, it may not be you right now, but it could be you tomorrow. Whether it's racism today, classism tomorrow, chauvinism, male patriarchy, all of these things impact us. And if it's not, it may not be impacting you now, or you may not see the impact, but if it impacts the least of us, it impacts everybody. So that's the first point that I would make. So I think you first have to have an understanding that a rising tide lifts all boats. So if there's fair opportunity for everybody, everybody benefits from that. The second thing I'd like to bring light to is that, we talk a lot about privilege, and privilege in and of itself is not bad. It's what you do with the privilege. You can signal boost with your privilege and use your privilege to make space or to support someone, or you can weaponize your privilege and use your privilege to hold someone outside of something. And another thing, though, I would like to point out is that these systemic things that have held Black people down, they don't benefit anybody. Even though over history, white people have been the benefit of white privilege, but the structure and the construct itself is not helpful to anyone. And understanding that, and it took me a lot of reading to understand this, because race was so inherently tied to how I was raised, and it was so inherently tied to how I viewed myself. I do a session where I talk about the dimensions of diversity, and I go through 3 different dimensions of diversity, and I talk about how we flex between all of them depending on what situation or what circumstance we're in. But for me, on a day-to-day basis, I'm 46 years old. The majority of my life, I identify as a Black male. And that's the identity or the dimension of diversity that I feel most closely tied to. But in reality, race is a construct that's created by people to create a means for classism. And it's a means of construct created by people to separate people. And it took me a lot to understand that. I was like, well, no, I'm Black. I know I'm Black. I know that's real. Well, the construct that I've been placed in as a Black person in America is real. But being Black and having more melanin than somebody else is just a construct. We're all people, you know, and no person has more value than the other person because of the melanation of their skin. But we've created this construct of race to separate people. So I think those three things have got to be there. And outside of that, I think you've got to have an authentic willingness to listen and to open up and be authentic and be open and be sincere and hear the other person out. And so those are some of the things that I think you specifically understandings that I think you have to help positively advance that conversation.
I would agree with you, and I would add that to positively advance this conversation, we really have to have education and knowledge about race and racism in America, and the history and the context. And Mr. Williams said earlier to understand that everybody has opinions and that those opinions may be different, and that's okay. I will respectfully disagree a little bit with that, when to say that if we're actually going to talk about social justice and reform, it's not okay to allow people to spew opinions that are rooted in prejudice. And we need to call those out, whether we're Black or whether we're white. And so not every opinion is actually okay, or if it's an uneducated opinion, that actually doesn't advance us forward. So thinking about how do we take the time to learn and get that expertise, and sometimes that means bringing people in who already have that expertise, as Randy said earlier, depending on where that conversation is, or taking it upon ourselves to learn more and to get that education. Because if we want to get to a point where we're positively advancing to reform or rebuilding, depending on where we're at, then we need to understand the context in what we're talking about when we're talking about racism. And then beyond that, I think that the listening piece is really very important, as well as empathy, right? So it takes empathy, particularly for people who, white people, if we're talking about race and racism, who haven't been in the shoes of somebody who's Black, who haven't had those experiences, to really be able to empathize with what it might be like to experience those things, helps to really advance our understanding, our attitudes towards social justice and reform, and helps us to get to an understanding of why certain decisions may need to be made.
Can I say something when you said about opinion, so I can make sure we kind of.
I was not calling you out. I'm sorry.
No. I didn't think. I promise I didn't take it that way. What I mean by opinion, even if it is a negative opinion, we need to hear it. It doesn't have to be right, but we have to confront those things, because those are the people that we have to educate. Because if we don't know their opinion and they're hiding it, then we can't have a solution to it. Because they said, well, I feel like this because da, da, da. And then we can educate them on this is the why, and this is, you know, how it has been. And did you look at this? Have you ever watched this? Have you ever took time to, you know, think about these things when you are putting that opinion into play in your everyday life? So that's what I kind of was alluding to about, we have to listen to both sides, even if that side isn't, because every opinion that we have as a Black person isn't correct. I'm not
talking about opinions just as Black or as white. I'm talking about
okay.
There's some that are right and wrong, right?
Okay,
so,
yeah, no doubt. Yes.
It's my opinion that racism doesn't exist. That's a wrong opinion, right? And we have to call that out. So there are some opinions that we can't just say like, hey, that's okay, that's that person's opinion. Or it's their opinion to think that Black people actually aren't as smart, and some people have that opinion. And And I'm not talking about just Black people calling that out. I'm actually saying, and I'm talking to allies, right? If we're going to be allies,
Yes.
we want to know, how do we positively advance the conversation? How do we get to social justice reform? It's not just the Black people who need to call that out. It's actually, we need other people to stand up. We need white people. We need non-Black people of color to stand up and say, okay, that's your opinion and it's wrong, when it is
I
wrong.
totally agree.
Mhm.
I totally agree.
Not tolerating injustice. And that's where I was going with that.
Yeah, no, same here. In fact.
Savannah, would you read Ben Latano's question, please? Because it kind of ties into exactly what the panelists are saying. And then I think there are a couple of other questions too.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. His question says, how would you recommend discussing the topic of racism with someone who may not be as receptive to it as others are?
Bingo. It's what you just said. That's what is scary, I think, for some people. And I think what I would think would be a point is this is the education piece, Dr. Ruggs, because we need to understand we can't be scared of that, but how do we do it?
Absolutely. So I think that, it depends on where people are. So there are some people who are not receptive because they're racist and they actually just have these prejudicial beliefs. I don't like Black people. I don't think that they're as smart, or whatever the case may be. Those people are really difficult to reach. But then we have some people who just aren't receptive because they don't understand what racism is. And I think that those people we can reach, but it starts with, as Dr. Tuttle just said, this education piece, right? And sometimes people have been talking a lot about the power of storytelling. So how do we get people to understand or experience this in a way that maybe makes sense to them? And so I have, for instance, a colleague and I just wrote a piece where we talked about how experiencing, watching, and witnessing the murder of George Floyd and the murder of Ahmaud Arbery is in some ways analogous to having a member of your family die, right? So for people who are Black, it feels like this person is not just some random person that we don't know. It feels like this is my cousin, my uncle, my brother, and I've seen it time and time again. So putting people, trying to make it more relatable in some way to them so that they can understand, I think is helpful for people.
Dr. Ruggs, I would take what you said one step farther or further. Especially for Black men, when we see George Floyd, I didn't see somebody that could have been my brother. I saw me. I saw that could have been me, has been me before, and I was just fortunate enough to not be murdered in a situation. I'm 46. In my life, I have been pulled out of my car and have been handcuffed face down 3 times in my life. And those are the most extreme cases. I most recently, in February of this year, in LA, leaving the NAACP Image Awards with a tuxedo on, was pulled over. It was a white male officer and a Hispanic woman. They both get out of the car with semi-automatic weapons. Now, they weren't drawn on me, but they've got them on and they're holding them down. And, I was on my way to take the rental car back to catch my flight to come back to Memphis. And so she asked me, well, I know why she stopped me. And I was like, no, ma'am, I don't know why you stopped me. When you're at the light and your wheel is on the white line. And I was like, okay, I'm sorry. So she asked me where I'm going. So I'm going right there to Hertz rental car to take this rental car back. And so she gets my license and she comes back, she still got the semi-automatic rifle on. And then she asked me, well, why are you in LA? So now at this point, you check my license, so you know there's not a warrant on me. You've told me why you stopped me. Do I not have the right to be in LA? But keep in mind now, she's got a semi-automatic rifle in her hand. So I asked her a question. I'm here for the NAACP Image Awards, and I'm about to try to catch my flight back to Memphis. Well, what is that? I've never heard of that. How often do you come to LA? You know, and in my mind, I felt like she's trying to press me, to agitate me, to make me say something, or to make me give her a reason for this call or for this stop to go a different direction. And when it happened, I didn't even think anything of it because you're just so used to being treated a certain way in that situation. I just know to keep my calm and keep my composure. Even though I know she had no reason to continue with her line of questioning after she checked my license and gave me my license back. Just take it. And I didn't think about it until after watching what happened to George Floyd. I was like, man, that is such a part of our life that I don't even think about it. The fact that she had a semi-automatic weapon wrongfully questioning me, trying to coax me into a bad situation with her, that's just what I'm used to. It's what I expect every time I get pulled over.
Kelly Clark, do you have something to add to this part from your time in the director role at FedEx?
Yeah, I do. For 2 years, I was what they call a preceptor, which is a management trainer type person, but we did not so much as teach as facilitate and bring information out of people. There was a diversity class that the company required all managers to attend. And I think that, in answer to the question that the student asked, may be an environment that allows you to do that because you have peers in a class. And you see, sometimes it's pictorials, sometimes it's experiential activities that you that you are experiencing. And one of them was the white students had to, the Black students had to exclude the white students from some activity that was going on. And they couldn't speak until we gave them permission to speak, or they couldn't participate until they had permission to participate. And then after that, we would debrief and say, how did that make you feel? And when you're with your peers, I think there is a freedom, somewhat of a freedom, that allows you to call them out. When you see behaviors that are racial or that are unacceptable to a group of people, not just Black, but this was all. There was also a class with, that entertained the area of homosexuals and gender and those kinds of things. So if your boss is mistreating you, you're going to have a very different commentary than you would if you have a group of your peers who are there. So sometimes when you're in a group of peers, it's easier to call someone out because the repercussions are less. But if I could say something about the question, the second question that we asked, something positive that advances, and that's facts. I've been hearing a lot of information. I mean, we've heard that Breonna Taylor's report, the police report, said that there were no injuries on the police report. So if we have information that is inaccurate and we're not hearing about it, we don't know, so we can discuss it and try to get it corrected. The thing that was on my mind was, if I go to jail for a particular crime, is everyone else going to jail and getting the same sentence that I'm getting for that crime? No, we know that the facts tell us that different people get different sentences based on various things. The judicial system appears not to be fair because they have people in them who have these feelings and beliefs and what have you. But information should be factual so we can use that to determine how we're going to go about making these changes. If you commit a crime and you do your time, is that the end of it? No, because the first thing you see when you go to apply for a job is, have you ever been convicted of a felony in the past 10 years at that? So there are things that are in place, systemic things that are in place that are specifically designed. What population in jail is more prevalent than any other? Black male. So you get out of jail, you go look for a job, the job asks you this question. What is that going to do? Automatically exclude you. So we have to be conscious of facts so that we can fix those things that are not accurate and deal with them, then we also have to be fair. So we know that, and those things are happening. So it's at the highest levels, judicial, police, and you should never, Randy, you should never have to accept that or think that that's being stopped while driving, black while driving is one problem. Then the other is being harassed while you're being questioned. That should never have to be acceptable to you. So people in power have to be called on the carpet so that we can start having dialogues that are accurate. We can't resolve problems if we don't have accurate information. And to have a police report, and you think that's the only one, I do not think that's the only police report that's ever been written that is not accurate. How do you have no injuries when someone has been killed? It's just crazy. So I think if we've got to dig deep and find these instances, then bring them to light. And then I think that's a positive area that we can start with. The judicial system, work relationships, diversity training type things, type classes, so that we can start dealing with these issues on a real basis.
Go ahead. You're 100% right, because I think you should not have to serve time and still be penalized after that. What was the purpose of serving time? And to go on another note, to have two men on this line, I mean, myself and you, Randy, and for me to be able to say this, it shows how rampant this is. When I was in 1994, I was 24 years old. I was coming home from practice, and my beeper, we had beepers back then, my beeper was going off. And I decided to pull over at the edge of Bel Air to use a payphone. And a police officer pulled up, and I was on the payphone, and they pulled their guns out and said, drop the phone. I dropped the phone. I said, officer, what did I do? Get your hands on the car. They slammed me against the car, handcuffed me, and asked me where was my ID. I told him where it was. I just got out of practice. I was a pro football player. He said, sure. Threw me in the car and got me out and told me, this is a drug dealer's telephone. You shouldn't be using this phone. And let me go. Went home and I called my mom and I said, I have accomplished something and I have money, I'm doing well. And this, I was a young black man, I didn't know in that aspect, I knew where I came from. And I said, and this is still happening. And so to see, like you said, George Floyd, I looked at myself and said that could have easily been me. And so those are things that, you know, when, you know, we grab the steering wheel different, just things happen. And so we have to be aware, we have to understand how it's looked at from every perspective. And we have to bring these things to the light.
Let me just add one more thing. And James, to what you said, it's not just, you know, finding a job and equal time for equal crime, but when you get out, you can't vote. If you're a convicted felon, right now, the books indicate that you are not able to vote. Now, some states are changing that now, but still in many states, if you are convicted of a crime, you don't have the right to vote. And voting is the one thing that is going to allow us to make sure that we put people in positions in office that are going to be sympathetic to racial discrimination of any type.
Savannah, would you read Abby's question? Because I think it's something that it kind of ties right in with the flow of this. And the magnitude of what Randy and James have shared is significant. And if you're not a person of color, I would ask you to think about how many times this has happened to you. It's never happened to me. I've gotten in trouble with it, but it was usually because I was speeding or I had a crazy car accident or something like that. But just because I was using a telephone, the police didn't pull over. Just because I happened to be in another city, the police didn't pull me over. And certainly there was no indication of any reason of You're just driving a rental car. I mean, there was nothing to that that would have indicated you had any kind of criminal intent or anything. So much of this, in my mind, is something that we've got to learn how to have that empathy that Dr. Rhodes talked about. And when you start thinking about that, that's a serious mind shift for people who haven't had those experiences. So what is Abby's question?
Abby's question says, how do we work on changing our work cultures? I work in an environment where racial issues are seen as taboo. I recently brought to the attention of HR that the company had not made any sort of statement to its employees concerning, for example, the protests that are directly impacting our communities. The response was lackluster. We are not a public company, and therefore we do not have the obligation to make a public statement. We think that our actions speak for themselves concerning where our values stand.
So,
I'll take you guys back to a story. I guess about when I started leading the diversity and inclusion effort at FedEx Services. I guess it was about 5 years ago now, maybe 4 years ago, and building out that program. And we stood up this executive steering committee. And I don't know if you guys recall, you probably remember maybe 3 years ago, towards the beginning of President Trump's tenure, you had the incident that happened in Charlottesville with the protests, with like the neo-Nazi type protests that turned very violent, where a woman got ran over and was killed. Just so happened, so that happened over the weekend, and that Thursday we were having our executive steering committee meeting, and these were executives that we had aligned to our D&I efforts to kind of help us have an influence. And so I led in speaking about that incident and saying that I felt very strongly that we needed to have some sort of statement, not necessarily denouncing what happened, but making sure that we put a statement out as to what we stood for as a company, so that our Black team members would understand where the company stood. And our SVP of communications was on that steering committee, and he shot me down very quickly with a very similar type statement, in that, we don't, make statements on situations or circumstances that are political and so forth. And I understand that, and I understand that companies want to be conservative in that. And I did not advocate for us to make a political statement. I just advocated for us to make a statement that would register with our Black team members as to what we stood for as a company and what our values were. And I was very disheartened that I got shot down so quickly. But the fact of the matter is, we weren't ready. So even if I had won that battle, I don't know if the statement that we would have came out with by the time communications massaged it, and by the time legal massaged it, and by the time it finally got out, which took probably a month for it to get out after all of that, if it would have had any impact. So now you look at the statement that Mr. Smith has made, and that most of the CEOs of the FedEx companies have made. They've came out with very strong statements. I would dare to say that the Washington Redskins would not be changing the name of that team had not been for Mr. Smith pushing that very hard. Everybody's in different steps in the journey of that from different companies. So FedEx wasn't ready to make a statement like that almost 4 years ago. They're ready to make this statement now. My answer to that question is, just because I got shot down, I didn't quit pushing. I didn't say FedEx is a racist company, they didn't want to do that. I might have felt like that and let me say, I didn't feel like FedEx was a racist company. I felt disheartened that they didn't hear my message and that we couldn't move forward with something. But I say, I got to roll up my sleeves, and we got to keep we got to keep going. So what I pushed for next was there's a pledge called the CEO Pledge to Action. And it was a pledge where a lot of different CEOs were pledging their action towards diversity and inclusion. And I want to say that UPS was on the list and some other. So I pushed for that, and we were able to get a statement from Mr. Smith in that. You know, and I kept looking for those wins that we could get to loosen them up to that communication. And I would like to think that it was those wins along the way that got us to the point to where they were ready to make the type of statement that they made after George Floyd's piece. But what I would say is you got to push them, and you got to tell them that even in that instance, the statement isn't always necessarily just about the company. Sometimes the statement is to make your people understand that they're welcome. And it's about the people that work for you. And at a certain point, you have to show as a company that you're not tone deaf to the people that are working there for you. So you got to keep making your voice heard. You got to keep pushing that agenda, and you got to keep having that conversation. And if you get no the first time, you know, I would even say take it a step farther and frame out what that communication could look like, and frame out what the impacts of that communication would be versus the cons. Because I don't see it where a company could ever go wrong stating what their stance is. Okay, we treat you good every day. Does that mean we can't say that we treat you good once a month? You know, I just say keep fighting the fight and keep pushing for those incremental wins, even when we get that no sometimes.
And I would just add, if we're talking about culture and workplace culture, it starts at, we can attack this from multiple levels, but having leadership is really important, and seeing action and building this into our strategic plans and our goals. So I think that making a statement is good, but it's not everything, right? Because if you're just making a statement and it's virtue signaling, and we're not actually following that up with action, then are we really solving racial issues if there are problems? And so if we want to change culture, I think that it really starts by having a commitment from the top, from leadership, and creating a plan, putting metrics in place to say, okay, how do we know when we've reached our goals around diversity and inclusion? And if we're talking about race, like being specific about that. And then the other way that we can change culture, so going top down, but also going bottom up, right? So we can all do something to help with the climate by changing the social norms within our organizations, by doing things like not tolerating the status quo if people are making jokes that are insensitive or saying things that are prejudiced, by just stepping in and saying like, hey, I'm uncomfortable with that. So being allies to our coworkers, and whether it's around race or around sexual orientation, gender, all of these different things. And so we can all be that change, and that helps change the culture and set the norms, right, within our organization. So I think that you can approach it both ways, and we need both.
Yes, I definitely agree with Dr. Ruggs. Currently, or recently, what I've experienced at my organization with the death of George Floyd, our company made a statement or a video supporting Black lives, as well as making sure that our employees feel welcomed to not only endure what we're going through, but to voice their opinion. And I do think it starts at the top. At any organization, it starts at the top. It starts with the leaders, making sure that they support their employees. And so one of the things, like I said, that our CEO did, she did a video, sent it out to all of our employees. And as an HR representative, you know, I've had the pleasure to really voice my concerns and voice concerns for other African-American employees. And so it's very interesting that how Randy, he went through something, James, he went through something. And as a young African-American man, I haven't experienced direct racism until recently at work. Because I'm in HR, I had to investigate one of our departments where employees felt that there were discrimination in the workplace. And during the investigation, one one of our Caucasian employees reported to the corporate office and to the executives that they felt very uncomfortable in the room and they felt threatened because they were in the room with a Black man. And for me, again, I've never experienced it before. So it instantly it drew me back to the video of George Floyd. Because if you take it a step further, just imagine if they called the police. Just imagine if they, went a step further to do anything else, it would have been her word against my word. And so I think it starts with the leadership supporting each individual. And when this situation arose, our executive team and CEO, she recognized that, I'm a very professional young man. And so she supported me 100%. And she made sure that not only did that employee voice was heard, but also my voice was heard as well. And so it starts at the leadership and allowing them to also hear from their employees at the lower level. But I think initially, one of our executives did something very similar to what you did, Randy, in voicing their concern and say, hey, let's give a statement out, let's give something out, and letting our employees know that we support them no matter what it is. And so again, leadership, it starts at the top. And that's my opinion on how we could change the work cultures within our work environments.
Quickly, I think Ms. Rogue spoke. She is so right. We have a lot of companies that put out statements but don't put action plans in place to change things. Because I worked at a company and I left that company because it was years ago, almost a decade ago. I was actually in retail at that time and we were robbed. And when the security person came in, she said, you may need to speak with someone, a counselor, because I know this is going to really hit you hard tomorrow when you really think about one of your own robbed you. And I was, what did you say? And that was very disturbing. And that wasn't her first time saying something in that manner to other people. I reported her years ago and nothing changed and she stayed and they said they would make changes. So I left. So it has to be a real change and not just saying something is going to happen, and things do need to be put in place. And a lot of companies need to put things in place and not just BLM and Black Lives Matter or diversity truly matters. It should matter in all instances, and that should happen.
Savannah, there was a question from Caitlin and a question from Lynn about talking to children.
Yes, ma'am. Caitlin's question was, how do you suggest having a conversation with a child that has a disability?
Trying to make sure I wasn't muted. That's a tough one. I guess when you ask a conversation, is the conversation about race, or is the conversation about the disability, or the conversation about what they may go through as a child that has a differing ability? So I guess I would maybe need a little more context, but I would take a stab and say, if I was talking to a child about having a different ability, I would be open with them in that they're going to have struggles at times with people understanding that. But that doesn't have anything to do with them. It doesn't mean anything is wrong with them. I think it's sometimes people are too judgmental, and it may be wrong with people for judging you before they get to know you, or before they understand your circumstance. So don't internalize the way people may react to you because you have a different ability or because you're different. And don't think that there's something wrong with you because you're different, because we're all different. But I would still also be open with them in that they're going to have some challenges and they're going to have some things that they're going to have to deal with to get over that and how people react to them, because that's just the fact of the matter. If you want to prepare them appropriately for that, I think the best way to do it is to prepare them for understanding that people may react to you because you're different, but that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It's just that people don't have understanding of how to really accept and deal with things that they're not knowledgeable of or that they don't know about.
And one of the things, when my twins were in high school, they're both twin girls, there was a young fella who was autistic in their band program. And if you can find people or your child can find people, they became almost like his ambassadors. And so he had a group and they had other people. This particular fellow's name was Scott, and he had such a support group that it was a wonderful experience for everybody involved, because they learned a lot about autism, but he learned a lot about them, and they kind of helped to be a buffer between some of the ugliness that can happen when a child is seen to be different. I can tell you a little bit about feeling that way as a child, just because when I was young, I was kind of chubby, and I'm still kind of chubby, but working on it. But the thing that I think there's a time when that's such a crucial age that's important. Lynn's question about how do you talk to your children about race, and I think of everything, there's some positives that have definitely come out by having more and more conversations. I'm a Today Show freak on NBC, and Al Roker, who is the national weatherman, so to speak. But he talked about, he and both my friend Craig Melvin, they talked about having those conversations with their children and just sitting down and in today's climate, realizing that this is a necessary conversation. And hopefully we get to a point through this that we look at the fact that differences are difficult. Randy mentioned his friend who was gay. That's something else that we need to learn more about. People who have various disabilities. And I think it's one of those things where James and I were talking today about critical elements, and one is respect. I mean, we haven't talked about that R word, but respect is really woven into all of this. And human beings need to respect other human beings.
I just wanted to quickly throw into Dr. Chapelville. This is April Mitchell. I had given Caitlin in a private chat my phone number because I deal with autistic children as something else I volunteer to do, and topics of racism and things like that are something that I've had in the jobs program that I am a part of to help autistic kids. So I feel like she and I will have some more conversations on that. But a lot of times we find that, especially because they're so literal, it's very hard concept for them to understand, because to them it's just a person, and you have to compare it to something that they grasp. So I'll be having some more conversations with Caitlin after this. Just thought I'd throw that out there.
That'd be good. Thank you.
Also,
All right, I think
add something really quickly?
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that talking to children, I tutor in the Memphis City school system, Shelby County school system, and it's second graders, and we tutor them on reading. And sometimes they will not say anything. They're very quiet. They don't ask questions. They don't want to say anything wrong. But if you make them feel comfortable, then they will open up to you. And usually after about 4 or 5 one-on-one meetings with these kids, when I go get them from class, they run and they hug me around the waist. But that's to say, I had a little girl and I told her how pretty she looked. And she acted like no one had ever told her that. So building self-esteem in children is really, really critical. You have to tell children they are smart. You have to tell them they are beautiful or handsome. You have to tell them, yes, you can do it. Because if no one is reinforcing this, and if you're in a classroom with the teacher has 24 kids, she is not going to have the time maybe to spend with each one of them, making sure that, you know, those kinds of things are taking place. But then you have bullying in school. So sometimes it's not, I raised a daughter in the schools, and sometimes it wasn't because you had a disability or anything. A lot of times it was because you think you're cute, or you think you are this, or you think you're that. So it can happen to anyone for any various reasons. So we have to make sure that our children are confident. We have to make sure that they know they are loved, and that we know that they are beautiful and can contribute, and all those positive things to build self-esteem, because I think that's very much lacking in many of the children today.
And just to quickly address Lynn's question of how young should you introduce race and social reform to your children, I would say that as young as possible, right? So for Black children, our parents talk to us about race when we're really young. And I think that when we think about talking to children about race, you know, we're equating it with just racism or just Black people, but white people should talk to their children about what white race is, right? And so we don't talk about race as much. And often, and also we can just introduce race to children by introducing them to a variety of different experiences. So whether it's the books that we're buying them, having different actors in these books. So children who are Black and who are Latinx, you know, buying them dolls that are different races and introducing it that way. And having that contact is really important and helpful for kids.
Mary, I think we've got one last question.
Okay, awesome. I just want to go ahead and say, though, thank you so much for all of your questions, and thank you to our panel for answering them so honestly and really continuing this conversation so well. I guess our last question here today is, how can we become educated on positive social justice reform and be part of the solution?
I would say be intentional about it. At this point, you matriculated, most of you are seniors, almost through with college. I would research it just like you research any other topic. If you're doing a research paper, I would just take the time to be intentional about finding good resources to help you. One of the resources that I love, and I always suggest this to my white friends that are trying to understand racism better, is how to, and I'm trying to understand how to be an ally better, is How to Be an Anti-Racist by Kendi Ibram. It's a great book for that. But I would say read, look up and find organizations that are actually in the community doing things, and find one that maybe matches with your passion and matches with your ethics, and align yourself with it, and volunteer some, and continue, and make a friend with someone that does not look like you or that's from somewhere different than you, and learn from them. So make it personal, but be intentional about learning more, and be intentional about taking some action, and realizing and figuring out, how do you personally take action to make the world better, and how do you in a more outward way volunteer and offer some of your time to make the world better.
And I would just add to that, so Dr. Tuberville mentioned earlier that in Fogelman College of Business and Economics, we recently started the Center for Workplace Diversity and Inclusion. And we are here to be a resource for students and for organizations in the community. So please reach out to me and to us if you have questions about it. We recently posted some resources on our website. I just put that in the chat that are specific to some of the issues around race, particularly in the workplace, so dealing with racial discrimination in the workplace. And so looking at some of those things can help you get started. And also the University of Nebraska, their Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion put together a really nice list of resources. Kindy's book, How to Be Anti-Racist, is on there, but there's a ton of other resources on there as well. So from books to articles, so shorter articles that you can read, to different websites that you can go to different TV and movies and podcasts and documentaries that you can watch. So they have already kind of given you a list of resources specific to racial equity, as that's what we're talking about. So I would encourage you to look at both of those lists as a sort of jumping off point, and then go from there. And then also talk to people, right? So educate yourself by talking to people and learning about people's experiences, because there's really power in hearing these experiences, hearing the experiences that Randy and James shared, and Daniel shared an experience as well, is a powerful teacher for us.
And piggybacking off that, there are a couple of good documentaries just to, like she said, learn your history and understanding. I'm Not Your Negro on Netflix by James Baldwin, I think is a really good one. The 13th, just to look at those two, the Khalif Broder story, and just seeing how injustice is done in the system for young teenagers and things like that. I think those are really good ones to watch.
Yep, and those are on that list too that I just sent you all.
Oh, okay.
Great minds think alike.
You do have a question and comment from Pritchard Sales, who asks that only 3.2% of executives and senior manager level employees are Black, and only five Fortune 500 CEOs are. He says that his questions are: how do we tackle systematic racism in the workplace? He said he is a young HR, or he is a youth in the HR industry as well. So how exactly should a young Black man or woman go about entering the corporate environment within HR?
Well, I can't touch the one about HR, but I'm glad he brought up that stat, that number, because I know several of us on this panel that have been on executive level, and you had to go to a national meeting and you really didn't see anybody that looked like you. And recently I had an experience where I heard a young man was African-American and didn't take a position because he said he didn't see anybody that looked like him. And I said I would have taken the position because I wanted young Black men to see somebody that looked like me. And so just, I think, a way of thinking and trying to stay in front of it and not be afraid and know yourself and just stand up and just be a man more than just a Black man at times, just to get through. Because, and that's the biggest thing that you have to do, be a man.
Well, I wasn't a man, but I was a woman in the same experience.
I was just talking about from my point of view. Yeah,
I got it. I'm with you.
Yeah.
I was the first Black female director in the Memphis hub. So
wow.
I know
Wow.
where you're coming from.
Okay, yeah.
But you also have to, and I agree with everything you said, you have to just sometimes step out there but take advantage of the opportunities. We had tuition reimbursement programs. I was able to go back and get my master's degree, and I made others, I didn't make them, well, the ones who reported to me, I did, but encourage them to use this opportunity to go back, because many times you can't move up because you can't compete. And the first thing people do when they have a job opportunity, they're going to look at your education level and use that as a means of elimination. So make sure that you are doing those things to make sure that you don't get eliminated. You get the education, go the next step, and you get the experience. You may have to, I had to go, well, I didn't have to, but my career progression included going out to the field. So I moved to another city to get a different type of experience so I could have that on my resume so that I could come back and you know, get to the next level. But you have to do some things maybe that are not, you know, that you might not want to do. You may not want to go to school. I know when I graduated from the University of Memphis, I'm going, oh, I don't care if I ever go back to school again. But you get in that workplace and you see what they're using as a scale to determine who's going to get the interview or who's going to get the next promotion. And you just feel compelled that you have to do some additional things and do those things. And you.
You're muted.
There's something happened.
Sorry, I just muted myself after I finished.
Wow.
I would say, one, you got to go in and you got to produce, right? So I think that's the first thing. You got to go in and you got to be the best that you can be, and you got to be willing to take on and do those things that sometimes other people won't or don't do. I think what the Black people on the call will recognize is the Black tax. I think that is still there as far as many other things are, unfortunately. But you're going to have to be better than a lot of other people to get looked at for certain things. It just still is what it is. The other thing I would say, when you really look at trying to get to the director level, trying to get to that executive level, you don't know what you don't know, right? So you got to get some mentorship from people that are at that level. And you got to align yourself with somebody that's at that level to help you understand how the game is played at that level and what you need to be able to articulate you having or show you having the capacity to do at that level. So you got to align with someone, and I would say have mentors that look like you that are at that level and have mentors that don't look like you that are at that level. So you can understand fully what goes on at that level and how you prepare for that. And I think you're asking the right question, because you got to go in thinking and wanting to be the executive one day, because people don't just happen to become VPs or directors. It's even the the white people that get there, that's hard work to get there. And that's rarefied air. And there's just not that many positions at that level. So you got to be on your game to get there, but it definitely takes somebody that's been at that spot to help you prepare and help you to guide your career to get there, because you don't get there by happenstance and by luck.
Also, one thing you could do to get into, I'll just say HR, network. That's one of the things that I've done all the time, as well as, of course, having your education, mentorship, having mentors. Also, another thing you could do is just connect with other HR professionals, regardless if they're your skin color or not. I couldn't tell you how many people I talked to that were outside of my race and even inside of my race. Also, another thing you could do is be a part of emerging leaders and meet other professionals. That's a way to get connected and to really see, are there any persons you would like to mentor you? And so luckily I have quite a few mentors in my corner, and Dr. Tuberville is one of them. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
Well, I was just going to say, Dr. T, do you think it's time to wrap up this great conversation?
Well, I would not be faculty if I did not give you some assignments from this. First of all, I'd like everybody who's still with us. I think we have almost everybody. One person had to leave. But I would like everybody to put in the chat 1 or 2 words about what you learned today. And then I want to give you some homework. And it's not going to be graded. You don't have to put it in the Dropbox. But here's your homework. And I'm piggybacking off of Randy's comment about being intentional. Being intentional means you're going to hold yourself accountable to doing something that you did not do before today. Okay? So maybe if you don't normally, and I know that things will be different, we might be sitting differently and all kinds of things might be different when we come back. But I would encourage you to identify somebody that doesn't look like you and reach out to them. Have a cup of coffee with them. Begin to develop a relationship that is not like what your normal circle of friends are like. And I think that is a real healthy way to get comfortable and to also learn. The other thing I would encourage you to do is, James gave you a couple of documentaries. I would watch those. You've got time right now, probably with Netflix. Reach out to some of those resources, read something, and listen to something that is going to inform you more. Education is a powerful thing. And as HR professionals of the future, we should be holding ourselves and our SHRM chapter to be incredibly intentional about doing things differently. In our group, it's been a pretty diverse group. I do want to give you one statistic that I think might make all of you feel pretty good. I'm frequently asked by employers who are interested in diversity and inclusion, what is your college like in terms of diversity and inclusion? And as a scorecard, most people are really surprised when I share with them our overall diversity is almost 41%, and our African American diversity is between 33 and 34%. And there are employers who are seeking to do better and be more intentional in their hiring. So you have plenty of people to interact with and to learn from. I don't think I have a single class where those statistics aren't represented. So step out of your box, get comfortable with meeting somebody different, forge a friendship with somebody that's different, learn from them. And then the other thing, Mary, if you would go back, because there were some people that didn't see your announcements, I want to just say something about what Richard Sales said. And it goes back to that announcement slide if you can.
Okay, let me see. There we go. That'll be easier.
Okay. You have, Kathy Clark mentioned this in terms of using your resources. James has mentioned this. Daniel mentioned this. Randy mentioned this in one way or the other. It is really important that you don't say, I don't have time to do these things that help me be better, or to help me be more prepared, or to help me be more equipped. You know, find a way to make the time for that. And it's a priority, really. If you want to be the professional you want to be, you want to have the career you want to be, I think all of them would attest that when they were in your spot, they did not know necessarily where their career was going to head. Dr. Ruggs does some phenomenal research, but when she was an undergraduate in college, she might not have known she was going to do that phenomenal research. But it came, and she's doing it. And she's making a difference. And so all of these things are important. So when you look at these things, it's really important. Mary, if you'll go to that next one in particular, because I want to talk about this coming up Tuesday. This is a great way. This is a virtual networking event. Okay, you can virtually do it. It's safe, it's healthy, and it is free. One of the things at SHRM Memphis is in the past when we were in person and we were having food and things, our events weren't free. This is a great way to do that. So go to www.shrm-memphis.org and sign up for that. that's a great way to meet a lot of people. We're very diverse in SHRM Memphis, and it's a great way for you to get out of your box, your comfort zone. And then the other thing that I would encourage you to do is to start preparing now for the professional you want to be, and to be also preparing to be the person who respects and shows dignity and has the emotional intelligence to have the conversations we've talked about today. I think everybody has identified. Savannah, would you read a few of the comments? Some of them may be duplicated. Read some of the comments so that we can kind of close up with some of the, we can't do claps very easy, but we certainly had a great panel today, and they shared really some highly valuable, change-oriented conversation with you. And we need to not just say, oh, good, it's a good meeting, I got extra credit. What do we do about it? Where do we go from here?
So a few things were that change starts with each and every one of us. Stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. Be the change. Listening and empathy. Empathy, compassion, and courage. Inclusion and receptivity. Empathy into research. Allyship, empathy. Hold other people as well as ourselves accountable, especially with inclusion. Research on how to explain social differences such as racism. I think that's it.
Okay, so I think you've got some great takeaways. Now do something with those takeaways. Don't just put them in a box. Be intentional. So thank you to our panelists. You did a fabulous job. We are so appreciative of the time you spent with us, and pulled you away from your schedule and other things that you were going to be doing today. And we invite you to come back. We'll have another event and encourage you to get engaged with us. So I hope you can see the chats, but you've gotten a lot of thank you notes, and be a part of that. So be the change you want to be in the world. And if you think something should be different, we all are a part of it.